begin restoring it to its historic level of what it was. As I like to say, we are currently in montage of design. My name is Sharon Brownfield, and I have the privilege of being chair of the Library Restoration Committee, which has been a great committee. And we had the pleasure of selecting our architect. And tonight, our architect is going to talk about the renovation of this space to really begin restoring it to its historic level of what it was. As I like to say, we are currently in montage of design elements that may or may not represent historical accuracy. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our architect, Ms. Randall Library.
Thank you. And I'd like to also introduce my colleagues, Jim Cleveland, who's designer working with on the project, and Sarah Chase, who is a preservation consultant that deals with our historic colors and historic color research. So Sarah really has the fun part of the presentation at the end, dealing with the colors. It's been a pleasure to work with the trustees, work with the building committee on the Randall Library. We're a firm that was founded in 1977. I joined it in 87. And we work on historic buildings throughout New England, predominantly in Massachusetts. And so that's been our specialty since then. During our research, one thing that has been very helpful for us was to look at the 250th anniversary of Stow, which had a lot of good information about the Randall Library. Some of the historic photographs. It's nice to see the building when the trees were small. I'm sure that some of you remember the granite entry stairs that come right at the arch there as you enter the building. But the basic bones of the historic building still remain. A little bit later view of it, also showing the entry there. A more recent colored postcard of it from a slightly different angle. The library was given to the town by John DeWalt Randall, and I think he even included his personal library collection as part of his gift to the town. It was designed by George Adams in Lawrence and built by A.P. Powers. The total cost of the library when it was constructed was $8,866.55. So it was quite a bargain building the library in 1894. And the building, it's a traditional load-bearing masonry structure. It's wood-framed floors, wood-framed structure. The exterior load-bearing brick masonry. They use Portland, Connecticut brownstone as the trim buildings. That quarry unfortunately closed just a few years ago. So the last good source of matching brownstone was sold to a company in Wisconsin, and they're piecemealing it out on a very expensive basis if you need a new piece of brownstone these days. And so what we've done is our charge was basically looking at the historic elements of this second floor of the building. And so just to go through, I guess things that are very obvious to everybody in town here is that, a major addition was put on in 1985. Is it 75? 75. And that addition was put on. The designer of that is Mo Feingold. He is now one of the principals in a preservation-focused firm in Boston called Feingold Alexander. And so that he is still practicing, and this was one of his first projects prior to the forming of Feingold Alexander. This is the original what was at that time the first floor of the building. So you can see the entry stairs, grand entry stairs coming in, and the drawing simply identified it as south room, book room where we're standing now, and the meeting room with the fireplace. So it was a very simple 3 main rooms to the library at that time. The vault was where, just before you enter the bathrooms, is where the vault was located in the building, and then there was a stair that connected both to the second floor, or now the attic, as well as a stair that connected down to their basement space where you now enter the building. This is the ground floor, or the entry floor of the present library. So it's a very, open, modern. It's where all the kind of the heavy functioning portion of the library is located. And so I think it makes a perfect sense to look at the second floor as it gives a wonderful opportunity to basically restore the historic finishes here, so that this space can be, I think, a more enjoyable, more functional space to dramatically improve the lighting here, go back to the historic colors for it. So you can see this is the existing second floor, the existing third floor attic space. Because of the stairway, the limited access, it has to be a staff-only space so that it's not feasible to make the attic space into a public space. So this is the proposed plan for the second floor that we're on. That we're removing one of the closets that projects out into the space, so it becomes a larger one. The staff kitchenette is not actively used very often as a kitchenette, so proposing to remove the cabinetry there so it can be used as storage space, so that it will more than make up for the storage closet that's there that will be removed as part of this renovation. Other element that doing is, I think what everybody that we talked with felt was very much out of character was the very contemporary curved stair that's behind you going up to the attic space. And so Jim will talk about that in terms of removing the contemporary curved stair and creating a much more traditional balustered stair that's part of that space. Part of the work that we're doing is simply not colors, but looking at the cracks, the deterioration. It's all horsehair plaster, so that if you took a section through the horsehair plaster, you have the wood lath. And the key to the horsehair plaster is the scratch coat is always pressed in. It was quite firm. It's pressed in and mechanically pushed out on the back side. So that's how the horsehair plaster engaged with the wood lath. And then the brown coat and finish coat were applied. But there's areas that have shrunk over time, cracked, that need to be re-adhered, and those cracks repaired. And it's interesting, side note, is that horsehair plaster typically use cow hair. So I guess what I'd do is like to introduce Jim Cleveland. He was the one who did these renderings, to talk a little bit about a couple elements of it before Sarah Chase talks about the colors. One thing that I should have mentioned earlier, part of the project that we're doing is looking at removing this carpet and hopefully restoring the original wood floor that's underneath it. And we've looked at it in spots, and it seems to be salvageable. But if it's not, then we'd look at putting down a new wood floor for that, depending on the amount of damage that occurs in certain areas. There's some missing sections of floor that we know where the entry was, where the safe was located. But that, and there's also some oriental carpets that have been in the attic. But the hope is to bring them back down, have them here that would really add kind of a sense of elegance in these spaces.
This is a rendering of the existing stair as you see it. One of the issues that was brought up to us about this stair is for the first portion, the initial turn of the stair makes it very complicated to bring anything up the stairs itself. It's a tight squeeze, to say the least. So I think one of our primary tasks was to straighten that stair, to take that first kink out of the run. So what we've proposed to do is to remove the sidewalls and straighten the last 3 steps down so that you come off the stair directly into the open central room. We also want to complement the termination of the stair with some newel posts to match the color of the varnished wood wainscot around the room. The next bit of the project is something of a more urgent note. The chimney has a certain amount of corrosion to the mortar joints. A lot of the bricks have chipped off, and this poses a water infiltration issue to the building. And it's important to address water infiltration issues when you're dealing with restoring finishes, because you don't want the water to destroy the work that you've paid a lot of money to have done. So basically, the reason we wanted to address this now is because it is not to the point where it needs to be rebuilt. This can be repointed and restored as it is. It's a much more economic point to save the chimney, to do it now rather than to wait and have to rebuild it at a later date. So I don't know if you can see this. Basically, there's smaller subtasks involved. There's going to be a small amount of rebuilding of the roof structure where it meets the chimney, but generally speaking, it's focused more on the mortar joints and making sure that the chimney is structurally sound. Another portion of this is looking at the south entry door. This will be removed. It has been redesigned so that it has a smaller head height. One of the main reasons we're doing that is because the door is so tall that it's causing the wood to check and to crack, and it's also causing it to warp within the frame, as you may know if you've tried to open it. Another issue is we're trying to make it compliant with modern panic hardware so that you can meet all the codes that you need to. So what you can see right here is from an interior view. We've tried to continue the language of the trim that is very obvious in these rooms, to try to make it harmonize a little bit more with the surroundings. We've also dropped the door height down to 6'8" and created a second transom there. The same process is going to occur on the north door here. However, we do not need to drop the height because it is currently at 6'8". But the same idea, we're going to be adding trim on the side, and we're going to make it harmonize a little bit more with the room. The last portion of this is a window restoration. So the general condition of the windows in here is fairly good because the storm windows did their job over the years. There's going to be some restoration that needs to happen. Glazing putty needs to be replaced. There's some re-roping needs to be done. Some of the glazing needs to be fixed. Like I think you can see a good crack in one of the windows over here. But the biggest portion is we're going to need to be replacing the storm windows. Once you take them off to restore some of the paint and woodwork on the outside, it's nearly impossible to reinstall them. So those need to be replaced, and hopefully you can get another 100 years out of those windows.
My work has to do with the last part that gets done, but I have a collection of Victorian era painter's guides, and one of them has in its introduction no workman is so welcomed by the housewife as the painter. It means everything else has been done. and yet, paint is the first thing that hits the eye. I'm always delighted to come and do the, as the selectman at the Needham Town Hall said, forensic work it takes to dig into the past in terms of the layers of paint and sometimes wood finish as well. And much of what I do is indeed physical. It involves figuring out what parts of all of the painted and finished, clear finished surfaces have not been altered or changed, what's original to the building, and then on those places, finding areas where there's a full paint buildup. I check a number of areas so I can see what is the maximum number of layers, how many times was it repainted or refinished. And when I've got a good fix on that, then I can take good samples back to a larger, I have a field microscope, I have a 3x optivisor, a 10x jeweler's loupe or Hastings triplet, a very small binocular field microscope, about up to 20x, and then in my laboratory at home, a much larger microscope that can go up to 100 if I need it to, which would be distorting on paint like this. The information from the sample then is to find which layer was the first finish layer, to expose enough of that so that, assuming if I determine that it was an oil paint, I can put it under a controlled ultraviolet light source and reverse the inevitable yellowing of the linseed oil. If there were blue paints and they were bound by linseed oil and then covered, prevented from any more contact with sunlight, with UV light, that linseed oil will have gone brownish and yellowish, and the blue pigment will be in that yellow binder and look very green. The people who did the first paint research at historic Williamsburg for a long time had a kind of soft khaki brownish green, and only in the mid-1970s did someone decide to have a look a little more closely at how paint aged, all the components, and discover that there was a lovely bright Prussian blue. If you go to Mount Vernon, do be sure to look at the dining room where you have a true 18th century Prussian blue. What I found here, I was testing when there's textured plaster like the wall in the room with the fireplace. It's always hard to get a full set of layers. But fortunately, before I left, there was a piece of documentary information. The Crowell book describes the library in the following way. The wall decoration is in salmon tones, which together with the frieze are in perfect harmony with the cream tones of the ceiling. That was golden for me, so that I was able to look at the salmon tones that I found in the turret room, in the reading room, and in the vestibule. And although I did not have access at the time to get samples from the frieze above the picture rail, I could certainly make the inferences. And here's the creamy ceiling color. So salmon tones with a cream ceiling. This north room, I note in my report the wall samples from the back room north gave only fragmentary evidence of a blue or blue-gray color. I'm not convinced that that was the original 1894, I think it is, first color. But it was what I had, and so it was what I matched. About colors, of course, there's always different perceptions. But I like to find colors that are not just totally arbitrary when the historical research is not fully satisfying to me. I looked at the shield, the Stow guard in the Revolution, and there are two blues on that central device that certainly are historic because they're not oil paints, that's a watercolor. They're not distorted by anything that makes them look greenish. So I mention them to you as something to think about as you adjust, and I will certainly help, if I'm given choices, point out ones that I think are good ones. For this room, this north room, it was, I think, originally a room that held stacks, and consequently perhaps was not given the full treatment of that central and turret portion of the building. I believe that is up. Yes, something else that's important, of course, is the clear finishes on wood, the stains and varnishes. And in this building, there's an important part of the architecture of the building is these arches between spaces. As I stand here, I see 3 arches immediately, and I know that this one to the north room and the arch leading into the meeting room, I think it's called, have beads of wood and flat areas in the middle. And you know from the wainscot that the wood and the window trim and so on, the wood was clear finished, it was not painted. When those wood beads outlining the arches are restored to the wood finish color, you will really get a very satisfying sense of the way the spaces work together in this building. And when the soffit is painted some slight shade different from the walls on either side, the effect will be enhanced even more. That was the important thing I wanted to conclude with, that paint informs, even if you aren't really conscious of it, it will inform how you see the building. And this design, typical of the 1890s, is gracious and welcoming. It doesn't give up a bit of detail for the sake of function. Detail and function go together. Thank you. Walking away, Heather.
Before kind of opening up for questions, kind of the key element for the library is the Warrant Article 44, which will be coming to town meeting either May 1st or May 2nd is the nights that it will likely be. And so asking, and this is a CPA funded, Community Preservation Act funded project, so that because of the historic nature of the library, it qualifies for the Community Preservation Act funding, so that it's not coming out of kind of any new appropriations, but money that the CPA currently has. And so asking to appropriate and transfer a sum of $380,000 would be the sum for the complete restoration of the second floor of the library. That would include the new lighting, it would include the flooring, it would include the stairway work. So that I would encourage all of you that have interest in this wonderful historic building in terms of to go to town meeting and to kind of help support this article. So any questions that people have, any comments? Yes?
You did mention lighting.
Yes.
You did, I missed it. What's the lighting treatment in your design?
So would be looking at replacing them with new replica pendant fixtures. I know that Jim Cleveland has a copy of the pendant fixture that kind of proposing at this time. It's a four-globe pendant fixture. They will actually have an LED light source within the globe, so you'll gain both energy efficiency as well as going back to a more historic appearance of the globe itself.
Are these consistent with buildings of this period?
Yes, they are. Yes?
I have two questions. First is, will the windows be treated for UV and light entrance? And the second question is, in the process of doing your study of the second floor, was there work done on studying the first floor for any work that's going to need to be done in the future, since we're resting on the first floor?
I guess in terms of the second floor, at this point there are not plans to add a separate UV screen to or film to the second floor windows. Is there a reason, given the fact that how much impact UV has on paint and materials? I think in our experience we've used it when there's been significant artwork that's been close to windows, and not as a film to protect, just the general painting that's within the space itself. So I think with the absence of significant artwork that's going to be displayed here, I guess we didn't see the need to add a UV film to it. And one thing it does do when you add it, depending on what angles you're sitting at, if you look at the windows, a lot of these windows have the original glass. So you see kind of the nice, slightly wavy view as you look through the window, which is really a nice feature of the historic windows.
The reason I ask is because it's not only artwork that's affected. If we have collections in the other room, et cetera, that's all going to be affected by UV. Mm-hmm. And particularly if there's paper involved at all. And the problem is with UV, as with regular light, it's cumulative in the damage.
So, I think we can certainly entertain it if, if the building committee, it's a trade-off between some of the aspects, where most of the artwork is, there's very little natural light there. But I also understand your concern. And you were also asking about the first floor. The scope that the town gave us was kind of limited to the second floor, to the historic spaces here. So other than meeting on the first floor, and helping the town deal with some of the heating and air conditioning issues on the first floor. But we're not looking at kind of the beyond kind of essentially remedial repairs to the heating and air conditioning system. Yes?
Has there been any discussion about the electrical supply or outlets in this section of the building in terms of updating it or moving it more to code, current code, in terms of the number of outlets?
Sure.
There's a sparsity of electrical sources in this end of the building, or actually the whole building, but particularly the older sections. And depending on what kind of usage this area gets after the restoration is done, that's certainly one aspect of kind of bringing it more into a more functional area.
So we've not addressed that to date, but I think if this project goes forward, we'll kind of coordinate with the building committee in terms of how the spaces will be used, and I think we can probably selectively add some additional outlets. So it's a good point. Thank you. Yes?
Couple questions regarding moving the carpet. When we have meetings in this room in the wintertime and snow and grit are being tracked in, that's going to be awfully hard on nice wood floors. And the noise of moving chairs around also is going to be So I don't know how large the oriental carpets are that are in the attic, but have you thought about that at all?
I guess my assumption is that particularly during the winters that people would be entering the space from the ground floor. And so hopefully by the time people get up here, their shoes would be pretty clean. So that, at least that's the thought in terms of the serviceability of the wood floor. I know Sarah has been up to the attic and looked more at the carpets, the oriental rugs, but they seemed quite large, if my memory is correct.
They certainly did. I was hastily going through photos on my phone to look at them again, but I did go up and look at them. I didn't take actual square footage measurements, but they would really be appropriate for the period, for the restoration work. So I'm hoping that they can get brought down, and they work nicely with the colors that were here.
My next question is about the staircase going to the attic.
Yes.
Do we have any idea what the original staircase looked like?
The original staircase is still there when you go through the door. So if you want to take a look, there's a door halfway up the stair. And so the stairs beyond the door appear to be original to the building. And you know that they did not curve going there because you'd run right into the wall of the exterior wall where you'd be entering the building. The building department has agreed that they would consider this basically a repair to an existing stair. So we're able to keep the same tread riser relationship so that, the upper stairs match. So at least dimensionally it's going to be quite close to what I think the original stair was. How it was finished, we have no direct information in terms of whether the balusters had open balusters like that, but it's certainly more in keeping with what would be a late 19th century stair than what's there now. And, we looked at, almost half a dozen different variations, and this seemed to, it's a steep stair. It's not one that is acceptable for use for the general public, but we're keeping, that lower half in a way that I think is visually appropriate. And it eliminates the winders, which, are tight.
The closed balusters as well.
Yes.
Okay. And my third point is that the original benefactor was John Witt, W-I-T-T, not DeWitt, but Witt.
Witt, thank you. I appreciate that.
And his sister Belinda, the two of them.
Good, thank you.
On
Yeah.
these windows in this room, are we back to shades? Is that what you're going to have for?
I think there'll be shades, but I would suggest having fairly different shades than these. Yes.
What's the vision as to how this room will be utilized?
I think maybe I'll.
Can you speak to that?
Yes, please.
This room, as you can tell already, is primarily used for presentations and for library programs. So it's going to continue to be used as that. We're hoping to get, with funding from the Friends as well as other sources, to get 2 sort of large library tables that library staff can then push out of the way when we need to do presentations, so that we can make this room usable for programming, but more importantly also so that adults, when children's programs aren't going on, can come up here and quietly study. But that section of the library will still be used primarily for the children's programs, but that we can share the space a little better than we do right now. Adults really don't have too many places to go on the first floor to sit and quietly study, but when children's programs are in process here, if there was, as Bob pointed out, more outlets, these large library tables, they can sit here and use this space. We can't allow the kids to actually come up here alone unsupervised, so primarily that door is usually closed.
And I think if there's. Yes.
I'm also concerned about the UV light in this room. It does a job on hardwood floors, I can attest to that. And if you're going to put oriental rugs in here, they'll soon be exposed to UV light. And it doesn't take much UV light to change colors. An old carpeting, an old, oriental carpeting. It's a problem in the future. So I'm concerned about the UV light coming in, being a deterrent to things.
Okay. Yes.
To follow up on that, could you quickly summarize that if there was a decision that we wanted the UV protection here, what would that mean to these windows? Would they be completely replaced? Would there be a film? And if there was a film, how would that affect what we see in and out?
It would be a film that could be applied. It's usually applied to the inside surface, but because there are storms, it could be to either surface, so that it, I don't know quite the percentage, but it might reduce the visible light through by maybe 20%. So it's not a dramatic reduction in terms of the visible light. Where it's effective is that it substantially reduces the amount of UV light, so that it's kind of like the low E glass in terms of sometimes its appearance, so that it would be, I think the slight waviness that you see in the glass, I think that would, most of that would disappear. Yeah.
In actuality, you can go from being totally clear to almost black when you put the film on. 3M produces the film, and it goes, they've got the full gradation of the amount of light filtering, let alone UV that it will knock out. Knocks out UV basically to zero, and it depends on what kind of opacity you want when you put it on the windows, so that it can go. And we're facing west. We get a lot of sun coming in through here. So it might be, if we're going to UV, we might consider the possibility of a slight bit of tint as well, just to block out some of the light. Light and UV, as Donnie said, do an awful lot of damage to materials. And it's, there are certain levels that are recommended for collections. And this room when it gets west light in the afternoon is well above that. So that it's, that's something to be considered. But it is a film, it is put on. It's a heat process, actually, to do it properly. But it's that way it'll stick, and you don't end up with those, like somebody put them on the car windows and you get all the bubbles. When it's done properly, it's just completely clear, smooth on the light, on the windows, sorry.
Yes.
A caution in question. Caution, right now there's not really an intention, as far as I know, for this to hold collections. So we're going to.
But if you're dealing with carpets.
Carpet, yeah.
It's the same thing you're looking at.
And I do value the old glass. There's no way to make you're going to replace the storm windows. Do the storm windows have the UV property? You leave the original windows in place?
I know the storm windows can get a low E, but I don't know any storm windows that you can get with a UV specific glass to it. We can look at it, but to my knowledge, none of the storm window manufacturers that are that kind of would be at the scale of doing this work would offer UV glass, but it's something that I can try to pursue.
Could the film be applied to the storms, or is it's exposed to the elements too much that it's just going to fracture?
I think in theory it could be applied to the storms because it's often applied to single glazed windows. This is something which I'm not sure your experience, but I would estimate it to be maybe a 20-year product or something on that. I suspect that 3M's warranty is only a few years, but it's a product that's been around for a long time, particularly in the museum world. Probably in the 70s, 3M, I think, started there, and they seem to kind of dominate the market for it. We can certainly look at it being added to the storm window. I'm not sure. I think functionally it should not make a difference. And I don't know that visually you'll be able to tell one from the other.
The main company that does installations in this area is New England Sun Control out of Smithfield, Rhode Island.
Okay.
And they would probably be able to, like, actually have the contact information on me. And they could probably tell you all the information needed in relation to the storms or otherwise.
Okay, good. Yes?
Could you explain to me what you're going to do with the woodwork? As to, are you going to refinish the woodwork? What are you going to do as far as refinishing the woodwork?
There'll be kind of within the budget, there's money for only selectively stripping and refinishing. And so that the areas that are in the worst shape will strip and refinish. The other ones will be lightly sanded and refinished.
You're going to use a varnish finish? Or?
A spar varnish would be typically what would recommend. So Sarah, Jim, and myself are here as long as people want to talk, so would welcome any of you to come up and we can talk further, but I thank you all for coming out. I'm very pleased to see this level of attendance. It's something that, not every town has as much interest in some of their historic projects. Thank you very much. Thank you.